Hey, welcome to our explainer. Today, we're diving into a sermon that treats prayer less like a quiet wish and more like an act of war. It paints this picture of a world where your worst days, they're not just random bad luck. They're actually scheduled attacks. So, let's break down this incredible vision of life as a spiritual battlefield.
Right off the bat, this one line tells you everything you need to know. You can just feel the energy, right? Forget about quiet, gentle reflection. This is a command. It's urgent. It's active. The whole idea is that prayer isn't passive. Nope, it's supposed to be immediate, forceful, and have a real impact, like right now.
So, if you're supposed to be firing prayers, what are you shooting at? Well, according to this sermon, the enemy isn't just some vague idea of evil. It's something very specific, a pre-programmed threat that's supposedly embedded deep into a person's life.
And that brings us to the absolute core concept we have to get our heads around. What in the world is an evil day? Now, we're not talking about a regular bad day, where you spill coffee on yourself or get a flat tire. No, this is framed as something way more specific and, honestly, a lot more sinister.
And there it is. The sermon's definition is pretty striking. An evil day isn't just a random event. It's a programmed moment. It's a time or a season that's been deliberately inserted into your life's timeline to make you vulnerable to attack. The big takeaway here is that this isn't chance. It's presented as a scheduled, targeted assault.
So how is this idea supported? Well, the sermon turns to biblical stories. It points to this child of prophecy who was totally fine one minute, and then the next is suddenly struck down by this mysterious, painful ailment. The interpretation offered is that this wasn't some random sickness. It was his scheduled evil day finally arriving.
And the argument doesn't stop there. It moves on to a huge figure, John the Baptist. His execution isn't seen as just a political move. The sermon really zeroes in on the fact that it happened on a convenient day, a moment that was spiritually perfect for his enemies to strike. And this is so crucial. The threat might be pre-programmed, but it's not seen as a done deal. The big call to action is to actively deprogram these events. You're meant to use forceful prayer to essentially hack into your own destiny and rewrite the code.
Okay, so if the problem is a kind of malicious spiritual program, what's the fix? Well, you fight code with code. You use a divine counterprogram. And this is where prayer gets framed not as a simple, humble request, but as a full-on offensive weapon.
This slide just perfectly lays out the two sides of prayer in this worldview. On one hand, you've got prayer as a proactive investment. You're praying for the future, for your kids, just like Jesus prayed for Peter before he was even tested. But on the other hand, it's also a reactive weapon. The idea is, when you're under attack, you don't back down, you fight back by praying even harder.
Now, this is where the conflict gets really personal. We're moving away from an abstract battle against evil and into a direct showdown with specific adversaries, enemies who apparently have a personal stake in seeing a believer fail. First things first, the sermon gives witchcraft a very particular definition, so you can forget about the cauldrons and pointy hats. In this context, witchcraft means any manifestation of wickedness, any action that is intentionally aimed at you to cause harm. And to show you the kind of mindset we're talking about, the sermon retells that story of John the Baptist's death. It kicks off with this unbelievable offer from King Herod to his stepdaughter. Ask for whatever you want, he says. I'll give you up to half of my entire kingdom.
Just stop and think about that for a second. You're offered incredible wealth, unimaginable power, and the request, guided by her mother, is for something completely different. It's not about gaining something. It's about destroying someone.
So this leads to the sermon's big analysis. Why would anyone turn down half a kingdom? The argument is that a spiritual enemy will gladly pass up material riches just to watch their target fall. And why? Because a person like John the Baptist was, in himself, a kingdom, a prize seen as more valuable than any amount of land or gold.
And that whole line of thinking leads directly to a prayer like this one. It's aimed at those who, in this worldview, don't just want to stop you, but who are literally waiting to celebrate and laugh at your moments of pain and sadness.
So, you've deprogrammed the evil days, you've confronted your spiritual enemies. What's the payoff? What's the end goal? Well, the sermon doesn't end with just surviving the battle. It ends with the promise of an overwhelming, absolute victory. The central promise here is all about radical abundance. The goal isn't just to get blessed, it's to be blessed so much that you overflow, that the blessing is so huge it can't even be contained.
And this overflow is described in really dramatic terms. The sermon literally calls for an explosion of blessings, and not just in a spiritual sense, but across the board. A financial explosion, a marital explosion, a material explosion, a sudden, massive breakthrough in every single part of your life.
When you boil it all down, it's a promise of completion. It's the assurance that all your hard work won't be for nothing. The idea is that you won't just start things, you'll finish them. You'll build the house and you'll actually get to live in it and enjoy the fruits of your labor.
And that's where we land. This sermon puts forward a really clear, intense worldview. It frames our everyday lives as this grand stage for spiritual warfare, where prayer is your weapon of choice and overflowing victory is the ultimate prize. It kind of leaves us with this one fundamental question to chew on. Is this how we should see our own struggles and our own triumphs?